So here with the aforementioned reporting on sanctions and also weigh in a little bit on the conversation Saagar and I were just having with regards to Tim Walz is Jeff Stein. Great to see you, Jeff.
Good to see you, sir.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, of course. So you tweeted this. We can put this up on the screen about Tim Walz. You were taking a little glance at his economic philosophy, and he had apparently put out this idea the economy is a garden, not a jungle. When you combine this with his record in the state of Minnesota, what can you say about his sort of economic view and how he might add to a potential Kamala Harris administration?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at his record as a member of the House, he was clearly aligning himself with the more moderate wing of the party. He had a vote score that was pretty centrist. But when he had the chance to implement pretty progressive legislation in Minnesota, it seems like he ran with that. Everyone knows by now recreational marijuana, the biggest child tax credit for low-income families of any state in the country after the Biden one fell apart. All kinds of other progressive legislation that, they had a trifecta. There were people, who were pushing it. So he had the opportunity to do it, which a lot of governors probably would do if they also had the chance. But at a minimum, we can say he did not stand in the way of progressive legislation and seems to be quite outspoken, particularly about free school lunches, which I think is an issue that Democrats see as a very effective populist policy that they can run on.
So, Jeff, you have always been so good at this. What has been your experience so far trying to get some policy positions and perhaps some insight into a quote-unquote day one agenda from the Harris campaign?
It's a really good question because in some ways, she is a bit of a tabula rasa. It's a little bit like, what does she actually stand for? Because in 2020, she sort of was aiming for the Bernie wing of the party.
Right.
You guys remember, she called for banning fracking, Medicare for all. I think I did a story at one point that was like, is Kamala Harris's $7 trillion Green New Deal big enough? Like, that stuff just looks absurd. But as a member of the Biden administration, and since then she's kind of distanced herself. We've seen her say like she doesn't support a fracking ban anymore. She's put distance between herself and the Medicare for All proposal. So what is it that she supports? And on a lot of issues, she actually seems to be a bit of a cipher. We don't really know where she stands on antitrust policy, which I think you guys have done some work on. Industrial policy, I think, is another big question mark. My sense from talking to people who have worked with her is that there's a few things that she does really care about. The things that I have heard that she feels in her bones are the care economy proposals, childcare, paid family leave, universal pre-K. Those are things that she's been working with the SEIU very closely for a long time, and she seems to feel those policies quite deeply. Medical debt, like reforming or canceling medical debt, and student debt are also things that have come up a lot. Housing, maybe to a slightly lesser extent. It's an interesting, I wouldn't say that she doesn't care about industrial policy or unions or infrastructure, but her, Biden had for 30, 40 years been like, if you woke him up in the middle of the night, he would have a theory about what was wrong with the economy. It's big corporations, his desire to be Union Joe was solidified over years, and he had an alliance with blue collar tradesmen that went back decades. He also, I think, obviously had a centrist legacy on credit cards and student debt.
Right.
Her policy positions are so much more unformed, but we're starting to see an emergence of this set of issues that I think would sort of make sense to finish sort of the stuff that Biden was unable to do, the parts of the Build Back Better agenda that Manchin killed. You can see her sort of gearing up to make a push to finish those.
Gotcha. All right, let's go ahead and talk about your work on sanctions, which is extraordinary. I really recommend people read through this piece because I think it's so important to understand this. You say how 4 U.S. presidents unleashed economic warfare across the globe, and you track the way that the U.S. sanctions regime has wildly expanded. And you also track the way that in many critical regards, it has failed to accomplish the supposed goals that were set out for it. So give us the broad strokes of what you were looking at here.
Yeah, it's as a reporter who covers the Treasury Department, I'm on their news listserv, and every week they send an email that's new list of people who we've sanctioned.
Right.
And it's I was reading these emails it felt like almost every day in my inbox, a new group of people would be sanctioned by the U.S. government. And I was what is the volume of this? Was the impetus of the reporting. It's how big is this thing? And we reported an analysis we did internally that took a lot of time to do, but we found that 1/3 of all countries on earth are under some form of US sanctions.
Jesus.
And the number that really I found jaw-dropping in the piece, 60% of all poor low-income nations are under some form of US sanctions.
Wow.
So we are talking about, I mean, just off the top of my head, Iran, Cuba, North Korea, Zimbabwe, Mali, the Democratic Republic of Congo. I could go on. I mean, the number of countries, Burma, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, like this is a breathtakingly large list that I think, I'm so glad that reporting has gotten the reception it has, because I feel like the more I report on this, the more amazed I was that people were so unaware. I mean, even I, as someone who covers this issue specifically, I was like, I had no idea that it was this
I didn't know we were
sweeping.
sanctioning Burma.
Oh yeah, that one goes
Myanmar,
back a
Burma,
while,
I don't
actually.
know.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's actually it's fun. Which one
wanna
you
be
say
canceled by
betrays a
that.
lot. What I found most interesting about it was about both how obvious it is in many cases of a backfire or of unintended consequences, and not the Treasury Department ever factoring that into their decision making. I see this with the Russia thing all the time, as you point out. You're like, yeah, it's weakened them some. Now we've also created though this entire like offshore fleet of ships which just operate outside the realm of the US financial system. So can you talk about, like, is there any feedback loop? Is there ever any assessment? Because from reading your story, it just seems like it just compounds. Like we invent new sanctions and we try something else, but there's never any, ask of both bipartisan of, does this actually work? Like, is this accomplishing the goal that we set out to do?
It's such a good question,
Yeah.
Saagar. I mean, I think when you talk to US officials about this, they recognize that the pressure to impose sanctions, the like sort of institutional force that pushes this apparatus along is like something happens anywhere in the world, and then there's this like force to do something about it. And because we don't want to go to war in some cases, because the impetus for that has I think subsequent presidents have seen the dangers of going to war. We've obviously the disasters in Iraq and Afghanistan. Following that, there was a sense that this is politically disastrous, and then simultaneously there's pressure not to do nothing. And so sanctions is like in this in-between position that presidents find that they can do something that's not war, but then there's no evaluation after the fact, after the news cycle has moved on. And so we have a chart in the story that shows the number of sanctions that are removed after they're imposed is breathtakingly small, because there isn't really any apparatus within the government evaluating whether these have worked after they've been imposed. Cuba, of course, is like the paradigmatic example of this. We've had sanctions on Cuba for over 60 years. And this is a thing where, like, you would talk to some, you talk to a young leftist and be like, what do you think? And be like, the Cuba sanctions are terrible. But I was astonished by the number of like senior sort of like foreign policy hawk types that I would talk to for this story, who would be like quasi-supportive of like Afghanistan, And they'd be like, can you believe we still have sanctions on Cuba? And we're like, you're like the guy who's like the caricature of the person who's like in the back office of the Pentagon pushing a more hawkish foreign policy. And even these people are like, what are we getting out of this?
Right.
And so the thing with this is like the political incentives are only to go forward. No one really thanks the government for removing sanctions. Maybe sort of people in those countries would feel that way, but those aren't important domestic political constituencies where you have, in the case of Cuba, members of Florida of both parties are like, do not remove these sanctions or we will have a field day. And so there's only political downside for taking the risk of removing sanctions. And so then you just see them pile up.
Yeah, because who wants to, listen, with regard to Florida, it's a red state now, so maybe we could have a more sane policy. Like, why are we still doing this thing at this point? But to your point, it reminds me of the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Like, there was a huge national consensus, and Trump flirted with withdrawing from Afghanistan, et cetera, but actually doing it is messy, and no one wants to be, that guy. It's the same thing with sanctions. It's an easy political hit. You can see him queuing up the talking points on Fox News about you took the sanctions off of Iran, and how could you, and these are evil people, et cetera, et cetera. So there's nothing politically to be gained from rolling them back. I'd love for you can speak to that as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But dig into the Russian sanctions regime. If I'm not incorrect, I believe this is now the most sanctioned country on earth. And yes, it's taken a hit. It's not like it's been totally painless for them, but it's also had massive, significant downsides. And I also don't think has been nearly as devastating to them as was initially anticipated.
Yeah, for the story, we try to come up with a sanction severity index because the scale of sanctions is so hard to pinpoint. And I had experts who were like, it's wrong because of this, and experts who would say like your sanction severity index is wrong in the completely opposite direction, which made it hard to reconcile. But one thing people did agree about was that the volume of sanctions on Russia is, I think, the greatest of any country. Like, we have imposed more sanctions on Russia than we have on any other country. But the number of sanctions can be a little misleading relative to their impact. So with a country like Iran or North Korea, we can say, do not have business with this country. We can impose a sort of breathtakingly sweeping secondary sanctions regime where we can say to European officials, you guys cannot trade with them either, or we'll sanction you. Right? That's like the scale of American hegemony. It's breathtaking. But that can also just be like 2 sanctions. You can just impose 2 sanctions on Iran and cut them off from the global economy.
Right.
Whereas Russia, you can be like, we will not take the sanction step that cuts them off entirely, but we will sanction like Dimitri's like vodka shop that like has no business in the West anyway, and then like 30 suppliers of military hardware that like are in like Eastern Russia. So it's like the U.S. has these political incentives to keep pushing out additional sanctions. So they like try to like fool reporters into writing headlines that are like, which I think they're actually quite good at. Fool is strong, so but like like they will put out press releases that are like when there was pressure to respond to the Navalny death, the Russian dissident who died in prison. There was a lot of pressure on the U.S. to do something big. And they came out with this announcement, like, U.S. imposes 400 sanctions on Russia in response. And like beneath the hood, like almost none of these were of economically significant impact.
Yeah.
Right.
So
that's a good point.
So we saw this with regard to Israel. We're going to sanction these,
the
like
West Bank settlers.
3 guys.
Right.
And these guys are like, we don't do any business with you anyway, so whatever,
and
we're
the
fine.
Israelis were upset about the symbolic meaning of that, but how much did that hurt the Israeli economy? It seemed quite little. Sorry.
No, I was just thinking, so in the future, so with the assessment and all of that, well, first, like, why did you set out to write the story? Like, what even, inspired you to do this?
I think just realizing that this is the main tool of U.S. foreign policy now, and it felt so under-examined and underexplored. It's really tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people that are affected by this.
Yeah.
And you look at, I think one of the things that kind of accelerated my reporting was looking at the case of Venezuela. There's so many international examples to talk about here. But in the case of Venezuela, the number of people hurt by that country's economic collapse is breathtaking. They had the single biggest decline of any economy not at war in modern history, 71% economic contraction. That is bigger than Ukraine in 2022, bigger than Iraq in 2003. It's bigger than Zimbabwe in the last 20 years. Like, this is a catastrophe that is among the worst humanitarian disasters we've had this century. And there's a huge debate about the extent to which like U.S. sanctions exacerbated that, but the consensus among the economists I talked to is like cutting off Venezuelan economic officials from refinancing their debt on global markets, cutting off their source of 96% of export revenue, which is the PDVSA, which was the main, the state-owned oil enterprise, which was like the sort of lifeblood of their economy. We saw malnutrition and poverty and hunger and all these horrific indices increase. And if you ask like a friend, like about Iraq or Afghanistan, like they'll be able to tell you like the U.S. like went in and like all these people died and like they know. But sanctions have operated in this sphere where, because the language of economic warfare is so desiccated, is so removed from like the viscerality of guns and bloodshed, we don't see the consequences the same way, even if they can be, even if the human toll can be as severe, if not more severe. If you cut off a country's access to food and medicine, it can be worse than a targeted military strike. But because of, for somewhat understandable reasons, because of the way the media works and the way human attention works, it doesn't concentrate our attention in that sort of way. So I know I'm rambling a little bit, but
No, it's very helpful.
What is your sense of how much our sanctions regimes on various countries, you mentioned Venezuela, have contributed to immigration flows? And that may be true, here to the US, but also in other places around the world.
Yeah, so we're doing, as you guys mentioned, the series, and the third story in our series was about how the Department of Homeland Security had produced internal warnings under Trump that went to the Trump White House that said tighter sanctions on the Venezuelan regime risks fueling out-migration in the region. So this was a risk that the Trump White House was made aware of in these classified reports that were described to us by senior administration officials. And the migration crisis out of Venezuela is a key part of the humanitarian catastrophe. More than 7 million people have left Venezuela since the crisis started. That predates US sanctions in part, but was accelerated by it. We are talking about something like don't quote me, a fifth or a sixth of the country attempting to leave.
Wow.
And then we have this situation at the border, which was, to be fair to the Republicans, was not caused by sanctions, and only spiked after Biden relaxed some Trump border policies, which the left will yell at me for saying, but is just sequentially true. Yeah, but there's also no doubt that a big source of migrants that was part of the Biden border crisis was migrants from Cuba and migrants from Venezuela, two countries that had been heavily sanctioned. And as we reported, they knew that was a risk of tighter sanctions.
That's very interesting. Well, Jeff, we highly recommend people read the piece. We're going to put the description down in the link, and we always appreciate it, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah.
Love being on. Thank you. I love being able to explain things at length and not just in 5 seconds.
Not on
we love having things explained to us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you guys.
Read the story.
You, Jeff.
It's really, really good. All right, we'll see you guys later. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show. Help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.